Okay, let me first introduce Sonali today. Sonali and I have known each other for a while now, a couple of years, maybe more than 2 years. Um, I met her at a point in time through my son. They had an office in the same space. Now they are in a different space. She was a startup founder. She and her colleague, Nicole, were starting up this company called Brightside in Chicago. And uh, one thing led to another, and we did a kind of a team session with her group. And that led to my working with Sonali in coaching for the last almost about a couple of years. What I wanted to do was it's slightly different from many of the other sessions that we have had so far, which have been about coaching competencies, experts coming here, MCCs and others who are coming here to speak about their knowledge, their skill sets, and so on and so forth. But here it's more, we are also going to have in future people who are either themselves sponsors of coaching, as in a case Sonali is, but also a client at the same time. And what is it that they have really achieved, what they have benefited from, and what has been their journey like. And this might be of, hopefully, of interest to many of you who are in the coaching journey. And probably, I'm hoping that this would add another perspective to just speaking with specialists who are in coaching. I somehow or other, I feel very uncomfortable in sort of conferences or stuff where coaches talk at other coaches. Unfortunately, despite all our training as coaches, many of us as coaches do not as yet have the capability to talk with other people or talk to other people. We seem to be talking at other people. Like to change that a little bit, not just coaches interacting with coaches, but clients, sponsors, and other people who are really the reason for which we exist in many ways. So it's my great pleasure at this point in time to introduce Sonali to you, Sonali Lamba. The password for today, for those of you who would be needing it for ICF, the first part of the password is Chicago, CHICAGO. The second part of the password I would give you a few minutes before. So we are starting now, about 5 minutes after the top of the line. Just before about 5 minutes, I will get into the closure and give you the second half of the password. I let at this point in time Sonali introduce herself. She's a graduate, as far as I remember, because she has been to a few universities, and I think she's an MBA from Kellogg, as far as I know. And she started this about 4 or 5 years ago. So what I would request you, Sonali, if you could just briefly give an introduction to yourself and how you ended up starting Brightside, and very quickly where it is now, before we get into the coaching-related aspects. Thank you.
Of course. Well, good morning or good evening to wherever you are in the world. I'm Sonali Lamba. As Ram mentioned, I've been working with him for the last couple of years, based here in Chicago. So prior to moving to Chicago, I grew up in Florida. That's where my family lives. I did my undergrad at Duke University, studied public policy and political science. And then I spent about 4.5 years in finance in Boston, working for a endowment consulting company where I was advising major endowments on their portfolio management. And then around that time, I applied to business school and was fortunate to be admitted to Kellogg. And that's what effectively moved me to Chicago. So when I first got to Kellogg, I thought I actually wanted to continue down the endowment management path. And I thought I wanted to focus more in healthcare. But lo and behold, simultaneously as I was applying to school, I was also planning my own wedding. So I think the context was right in my head as I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, and was also exposed to this industry that was massive and also incredibly behind. And so when I got to business school, I was actually more interested in exploring the wedding industry, ways with which you can modernize it and make money, and less interested in actually going through the formal recruiting process inside healthcare. So I met with the dean and I asked for her permission to not recruit. She gave me her blessings, and that was sort of the beginning of the end for me, and how my journey into Brightside began. So interestingly, I'll tell you more about the company in a moment, but my co-founder, Nicole, was my very first friend at business school. We met one another sitting side by side during orientation. She was always like a champion and an advocate for me. She had another consulting offer, and then joined my business plan writing class, our last semester of school. And what started off as just kind of an academic exercise turned into the two of us traveling for conferences and meeting tech developers. And next thing you know, we moved to Philadelphia. She rescinded her consulting gig, and we were kind of off to the races, starting our own company together, and never kind of looked back. So the whole kind of process of Brideside was very organic for me. So Brideside is a shopping platform for groups of women who are participating in weddings as a bridesmaid. So I know this is a traditionally Western convention and tradition, but in the West, a bride is often bestowing upon her, call it 5 to 10 best friends, this honor of being her bridesmaid. And part of what that means is that the bridesmaid is responsible for purchasing a bridesmaid's dress that the bride selects for her. And she's also responsible for buying another, call it $800 worth of other retail items to participate in this wedding. So she's purchasing shoes, she's purchasing lingerie, she's purchasing gifts for the bride, on top of a host of other things. And what Nicole and I uncovered is it's sort of become this rite of passage for bridesmaids to suffer through this experience. Yet it's a tradition that isn't going anywhere. And there are about 15 million bridesmaids in the US every year. So we said, what if we create an amazing experience for these groups of women who are participating in weddings, and from there unlock this opportunity to work with these women over and over again. Because if you think about it, you're a bridesmaid in your friend's wedding, and then you're a bridesmaid in your other best friend's wedding, and then in your other best friend's wedding. So while the wedding industry is often perceived to be a very one-time transaction, when you're talking about bridesmaids, there's an opportunity to sell to them multiple times. So the most interesting evolution of Brideside is that at the beginning, we wanted to create the first online channel for groups of women participating in weddings. So we basically built this awesome e-commerce platform, lots of really cool technology to help the bride coordinate the purchase on behalf of all of her friends who live all over the world. But we quickly realized that all we had done was move the problem offline to online. We didn't actually solve anything. And after that, the business model has evolved where now we have a try at home program where bridesmaids can actually receive merchandise at home. In the early days, I was fulfilling those dresses from my dining room and running across the street to FedEx. Fortunately, I had a FedEx literally across the street to mail the boxes out. Our try at home program now, we have over 5,000 units in our inventory, and we're sending out thousands of boxes a month. And the biggest evolution is how our selling process evolved. So where traditional e-commerce is all about making it simple for the customer to guide themselves through your experience, we actually ended up hiring a sales team. And these women work with anywhere from 150 to 200 bridal parties at any given time. And they are actively pulling our customers through our sales funnel. So this became an opportunity not just to sell bridesmaids dresses to customers. Sure, and at the end of the day, that's what we do. But I think where we have really evolved and where our thinking as a company has evolved is that what we're doing is giving women the permission to celebrate during life's most meaningful events and to focus on what really matters, and let the transaction at the end of the day sort of be a souvenir to the ultimate reminder that you're here to help your friend celebrate this most important day in her life. Similarly, our team, we're now approaching 40 full-time employees. We are a 100% all-female team, from technology to logistics to marketing. And internally, our organizing principle is very similar to how we like to talk about ourselves to our customers. So we believe that Brideside exists to provide peace of mind. And peace of mind is, however you choose to define it as a customer, could be transparency, could be great product, it could be speed and delivery, whatever it is that's going to help you kind of breathe a little easier. And internally, peace of mind means wonderful training, access to your boss, professional development, great feedback, and kind of whatever it takes to make you feel happy and committed culturally to your company. So we have a couple of stores at the moment around the country. We're headquartered in Chicago. We have a store in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then we also have a partnership with a very large retail company, holdings company called Hudson's Bay. They own a series of malls around the country, around the world actually, but also a few in the US. And we have a store inside of their retail location in Washington, DC, and then just opened on Fifth Avenue in New York last week. So lastly, I'll just tell you at Brideside, I operate as a co-founder, but also now more formally as our COO, and I have been for the last few years. I think Nicole and I very naturally gravitated towards different parts of the business. So she's always been more fascinated in growth, so sales, marketing, business development, partnerships, and I very naturally gravitated towards the more operational pieces. So relationships with our manufacturers and designers, technology, logistics, and customer care. Kind of more recently, I've started wearing the HR hat, which has also made it very nice to have a relationship with Ram, because I'm also stumbling through and learning what that means as we've gotten bigger and bigger. But I love my job and the fact that I'm always touching very, very different parts of the business every day. I'm constantly being challenged and constantly learning. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thanks a lot, Sonali. It's been a fascinating journey with you, for me as well, apart from, as you said, your own fascinating journey from a startup. Today, I think you are pretty close to about $6 million a year, probably more, and you're really going places. I mean, the statistics show that the first 3 years are the most difficult periods of any startup, and you've crossed that pretty much very, very successfully. The question I have for you, let us start there. What is it that led you to being coached? I know that we started with that team session. I don't really quite remember the background to it, but then you became, I started coaching you, you started working with me. How did it start for you?
Mm-hmm. So, truth be told, at the very beginning, I didn't even know that the idea of coaching existed. And as Ram mentioned, Pranav and I literally worked across the hallway from one another for almost 18 months. And I had no idea what he did behind those doors in his office. And then as I slowly began to learn about Coacharya and what coaching was, our team was also starting to get a little bit bigger. And I think that was the first realization for me that there is a tipping point for when you have 8 employees on staff to when you have 10 employees on staff. And all of a sudden you begin to lose control over your, I hate to use the word at this stage, but over your culture of the company, over the kind of side conversations people have with one another, over morale. And simultaneously, as a fast-paced company, it's really hard to give yourself the permission to focus on both the people as well as on business as usual and growth and sustainability of the business. And so when we engaged Ram and Pranav, it was literally a Friday in October. We called them at 8:30 in the morning and said, "Are you guys still available to come by this afternoon to lead us in some kind of healing exercise for our team?" And I don't actually even recall that there was a specific incident that happened. It was just that you could cut the air with a knife with how much tension there was among our young team and their kind of attitudes towards us, feeling as though we weren't paying attention to them, that we weren't carving out a professional experience for them, and we literally didn't know what to do. And so that afternoon was the first time that we did this speed session, and everybody enjoyed it so much. And I think it really set the tone for how we interact with one another and the foundation that we wanted at Brideside. But I think a month later, I reached out to Pranav and to Ram again, because that experience gave me the confidence to acknowledge that I was having a crisis of confidence, where I was beginning to feel like everything was moving very, very fast. And I was starting to doubt the contributions that I was making, and whether I was focusing on the right things at the right time, whether I was being efficiently recognized for the role that I was playing as our founder, and that I was still kind of necessary and needed. And so in the early days, Ram and I spoke, once a week, and it wasn't necessarily just, talking about these, we can now call them like these transactional issues, like what happened at the office that made me feel, invaluable, to actually like going up to 30,000 feet for the first time in my, at that point, 2.5 years with the company, coming out of the weeds, out of the day-to-day, and actually saying, okay, like, let's take a look at the bigger landscape of what's happening around you. Let's take a look at Brideside and the role you play. Let's take a look at you as an individual, as a mother and as a wife and as a member of your family. And let's talk about your priorities overall. And then let's distill that down from there. And it was a process, and it took a little bit of time. But I think it was that exercise and that act of giving myself the headspace and the time to come back up to 30,000 feet that I quickly realized I can't just be the founder of a company from 9 to 7 and then be a mother and a wife for the end of the day, that I had to do a better job of integrating all of this together. And it was that kind of big aha moment that I think coaching gave me, and has completely changed the way that I conduct myself and the way that I interact with people, both at work and outside of it.
Yeah, thanks, Sonali. Just for those of you, Sonali used a couple of terms which may not be familiar to all of you. Speed, the SPEED, is a process that we use at Coacharya. Sort of adapted it from appreciative inquiry principles. It's a vision to action program where we work with groups of people, get them to co-create what is it that they would like to see. And then based on that, we go into details. In actual, it usually takes about a day at the very minimum, sometimes about 2 days. But what we did with Sonali's group was just about 2 hours, which is primarily into creating a vision. And something really fascinating developed there. Each one of them, we broke them up. There were about, as Sonali said, about 10 or 12 people. We broke them into 3 or 4 groups, and each one of them came up with, we had got some flip charts. They came up with graphical representations of what they wanted to see. I still remember in my mind's eye that Sonali's group came up with the different circles and how they looked at this whole business, unlike other people, as something a lot more than just bridal dresses. They went into all kinds of areas. And but the interesting part for me was that everything was focused on women. It was all about how do we work with women, how do we serve women, how do we develop the primacy of women, as it were, in businesses. So that to me was, for me, that was one of the main reasons that I in a sense, enjoyed working with Sonali, because that is an area of special interest for me. So Sonali, from that perspective, this core belief in you and Nicole and the rest of the team that you've been working on women orientation, and what is it that you want to create with that? Can you talk a little more about that, please?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's a work in progress. And it's something that's fundamental and very important to both Nicole and I. But we're realizing it is very hard to implement, and it's a work in progress. But I think fundamentally what we want is to create the next great American workforce of women. And we've seen a couple members of our team over the years leave Brightside to pursue other opportunities. And of course, there have been those who have left where it just wasn't a good fit with our company. And then there's others who've left and we've been a little bit sad to see them go, but at the end of the day, still incredibly proud because they've gone on to do amazing things and to represent us and Brightside very, very well in whatever field that they chose to pursue. So when we think about the role that we want to play, we often talk about wanting to create a group of women who have very strong functional skills that they can take on with them in the rest of their career, that Brightside becomes a very credible checkbox or launch pad or whatever you want to call it for your next step in life. But we also want to create a group of women who are professional and articulate and know how to advocate for themselves and negotiate on their own behalf, and to interact in the workplace as amazing collaborators and teammates, but also as amazing managers and mentors too. And I think it's a very heavy task and something that we both talk about a lot and are finally in a place now that we have so many people on staff and so much at stake that it's time for us to really focus on it. And we've kind of begun that process a little bit now, and it's something that I'm very interested in taking up with ARMS.
Yeah, thanks, Sonali. I mean, one of the things, at least in the days when I used to directly run many of the training programs, we used to have a session as to why women make better coaches. People thought that it was just something thrown at them to discuss and deliberate. But for me, it was a clear conviction that women do make better coaches for various reasons, and we can debate that in another forum. But I also believe that women make better leaders. The very fact that they pretty much are the center of a family, they are the ones who lead the family, the mother and the wives and so on and so forth. They take the responsibilities in any context, whether it's an Indian context or an American or a global context. Somehow in our society, there is, unfortunately, there is a limitation of their role, in a sense, a degradation of their role from being a leader to something less. And that is why I think the kind of work that Sonali and Nicole are doing enormously impresses me. And I was hoping that those of you women out here, and also men who support this kind of an initiative, would take a far greater role in allowing them to come on their own and really prove themselves as they are capable of being better leaders than men. I would like you all to share your questions that you have, both from this perspective as well as from an entrepreneurial perspective. So what I would like to move on now, Sonali, though you briefly touched on it, and I do remember several phases of what we went through over the last couple of years, maybe more. We started with one, like you said, when you go from even 8 to 10, you suddenly found that there was this huge difference in terms of how do you handle the team and so on. But that was one part of it. And then there were several other things that we went through, as you said, some of them personal, some of them 30,000 point of view. If you were to talk about a few stages in that coaching, which made sense to you, which in a way allowed you to refine the way that you dealt with things?
So kind of reframing the question a little bit, over our journey together, what are some of the kind of ways with which I learned how to cope with our growth over time? Is that effectively what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's a great question, and I'd like to think that once I figured out a method that worked for me, that it's the method that I've used continuously, from whether we were a team of 10 to 15 to a team of 25. And I think what that evolution was for me was this idea of transitioning the way that I interact with people from being a mentor manager to being a leader and a coach. And these are these are a transition that Ram and I worked on for a very, very long time. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this at this point, but to re-articulate it. When we were at the stage of being 8 to 10 people, granted, I was still executing a lot, but I did have the fortune of having a few folks who were reporting to me and who were helping me execute. And what I was doing at that time was effectively managing them and helping them complete tasks. I'm not a micromanager by any means, but it would be very, very kind of like step by step, here's what it's going to take in order for you to complete this task. Let's check in to make sure that this task was completed correctly. How can I help you, support you to get this task done? And I think I quickly realized that not only was it was appropriate at the time, but it was not allowing me to do the things that I needed to do in the areas that I needed to focus. And so what happened is then I then began to shift a little bit more from being more of a manager to being more of a leader. And it took a lot of work, a lot of very deliberately practicing this, a lot of oftentimes failing to achieve my objective. But ultimately, when I was able to successfully make that transition, I could feel it. Because the way that I was interacting with my team, the way I was interacting with my colleagues and those who were reporting directly to me was less, here's how you get things done, and more, you tell me, articulate the problem that you're seeing, and let's talk about the solution that you've uncovered for yourself first. And then let's talk together about exactly how to execute on that. And then let's have the checkpoints. And I think when I figured out and began to trust that methodology, I began to not only see that the folks I was working with were taking on more and more responsibility themselves, they were only elevating things that I needed to know about to me. I wasn't necessarily getting bogged down in some of the details that I no longer had time for. So that was one big part of it. And I think the second part of it was acknowledging that I needed to learn to say no more often. That I needed to also understand my own personal limits and realize that sometimes saying no was the most productive thing I could have done for myself as well as for the people that I'm working with. And I tried so many weird ways of doing that. I remember at one point I told people, like, I never get anything done during the day because whenever you come to interrupt me with a question, I stop what I'm doing to help you. And I need to practice taking care of the things that I need to take care of. So if you don't mind, I'm only going to answer your questions for the last 15 minutes of every hour. And if you can't get to me then, write me an email or find me in the next hour. Weird. It worked for like maybe 48 hours. But I think just like the act of having the confidence to say that out loud during a group meeting just gave me the sort of like, that was just the first step I needed to take in order to start saying to people, like, can we talk about this later? Or I'm happy to work through this with you, but I really need you to make a little bit more progress toward the solution before I can actually start getting involved. So I think, and I would like to continue to think that that kind of transition in how I interact with people is something that I will continue to take on with me now that our team is getting bigger and there's more and more responsibility, that's just a framework that I can always hold on to.
Yeah, I still remember as part of one of the things that Sonali mentioned about, she started keeping a journal. My main suggestions to her, like I do with every executive, is that the executives waste a lot of their time by giving solutions to other people, believing that that's what they really need to do. And while giving solutions to people, they actually disempower them from thinking for themselves. So the best way to do that is to co-create solutions. And in that sense, you cannot stop people from coming to you, but what you can do, instead of answering their questions in a solution-giving way, you can always tell them that, yeah, next time you come to me, you bring with you your own solutions, maybe 4 or 5 of them, and then we will discuss that, and we will try and find out what is the best that works for you. because your DNA is going to be different from mine. Another thing that I want to touch upon, but I'll answer a couple of questions that have come up here. First is also when we talk about DNA, in a startup environment, and many of you, if at a point in time you're going to acquire people who are going to work with you, even if it's a coaching business, it's not going to be the kind of huge potential business like what Sonali and Nicole are running. How the founders and the co-founders learn to live with each other. It's an enormously, it's a complex, tremendously complex, but that's the most crucial thing that needs to be done in an organization. And of course, the way that they do it amongst themselves is how it flows into how they manage the team. And I think that's one of the discovery process that Sonali went to. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And Terry and others Shanaz have asked questions on what the speed process is. Very, very briefly, let me take you through. We can spend a separate session on this for those of you who are interested. Speed is something that I adapted, as I said, from appreciative inquiry, which has the so-called 4 or 5D principles: define, discovery, design, all that kind of a stuff. So essentially, we start with a process of taking a group of people who may not necessarily be all working together in a particular project, but at this point in time, they are working on a project or towards a common vision. Very often what the organization tells them to do is what they call a sharing of a vision. To my mind, it's the worst misnomer that we can use, because the top management does not share any vision. They have already developed a vision between a small bunch of people. Like, for example, if it's Sonali's company, it might be just between Nicole and herself, and then it is just communicated to other people. And the euphemism that we use for it, totally incorrect, is called sharing, because there is no sharing. It's a one-way communication. So in the speed process, what we try and do is to create a kind of a condition in which people share amongst themselves the positive experiences that they have in their lives, and other people come in very appreciatively, working with them in terms of boosting their ego, in a sense, and they share within each other. And in the process, what happens is it extraordinarily powerful emotional bond happens. It's a very experiential process. I mean, I can keep talking it for hours together, nothing will happen to you. But actually try it out once. Just get a group of people, 10 people, ask them to just open up and talk about. And everybody likes to talk about themselves, and ask them to talk about something that is very meaningful, what transformed their lives. And just say to other people, you cannot say anything negative about what they said, but you have to appreciate them. Even if it is just their look, their hair, the tie, the shirt, the skirt, whatever, shoes, say something appreciative about the other person so it makes them feel good. And that's what it does to us. And very often we don't realize it, and we make negative comments about other people. And in the process, what happens is within very, very short period of time, believe you me, I have done this with groups of 20 people, and it takes about a couple of hours. There's enormous amount of emotional bonding that takes place. In fact, in many sessions that we do this, very often when I do it with my son Pranav, when they ask, well, what is it that we need to bring? He said, yeah, usually we advise you to bring a few boxes of tissues because people start crying and you need that. And that really happens. And I remember Sonali can testify to that. In her group, at least about half a dozen people broke down. I mean, we were not talking about their personal emotional experiences, not about breakups with their boyfriends or something that's happening. We were talking about business. And then when you talk about business, and still when they talk about sharing their experiences, they start getting so emotional. And it's not about women. I have seen this happening with men as well. So there's something enormously powerful that happens in that process of building an emotionally bonded team out of a group of maybe cognitively related individuals who form groups. And once that process is established, we move them into smaller groups and ask them to work with crayons, with like children, play around, forget about all your business as a business. What is it that you really see that your business is going to go into? We don't want it in words, but we want it in some kind of pictures and whatever way that you can put it. People come with all kinds of crazy things. And then you collect them together, you synthesize what they have got, and you got some kind of a collective vision, and then use something like a grow model from there. from that point of view, from the vision where you are, what is it that is standing in the way? What are the things that you can do to move towards that? And going through that process in a stepwise process, and it can take between a day and two, depending on the size of the group and the complexity, you can pretty much arrive at, and I have done this in very, very many organizations today, and every one of them has been a success, that you arrive at action plans which are as good as preliminary budgets that people can work on, and also ends up with individual accountability. There are people who actually sign off saying, hey, within this, I take responsibility for this, and they give it to the team leader. And we follow it up with something like monthly coaching sessions, follow up with them, how are they progressing in this. So it's a blend of group and individual coaching sessions where behavioral changes are needed. We work with individuals as well, but by and large, it's a series of group sessions, starts with 1 day or 2 day session, moving into a specific number of these. And those of you who are interested, you can mail me directly. There is also something on our website on this in a brief way. There is, I think, a document which explains the various parts of this process. We have now made this as a standard corporate offering. So this is how we started with Sonali's group in a small way. We have done it with several other companies, entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, very, very large multinational companies. The process is exactly the same. So if you have any questions I can answer, do put it up on the chat box. So moving on, so this whole thing about, let me try and relate it to what I started with, was that you have a team of co-founders. In this particular case, there are only 2 of them. Of course, they've got another 3 or 4 people who are senior members of the team, and they have now almost about 30 people around them. In many companies, it may start with a larger team. The fact is, and I don't want to go more into details than that. One of the surprising things that I found was, I usually, for want of anything better, I would start with whoever I coach. For a brief period, I was also coaching Nicole at that time, but we decided that we would focus on one person. And I asked them to do their MBTI profiles. Mm-hmm. Surprise, surprise. It was identical even in respect of scores, and you won't believe it. And they are completely different people. So one of the things that taught me was that don't go by just literal interpretation of any of these psychometric profiles. They may be true. I'm not saying they're not true. But there is something far beyond what it interprets in terms of the DNA of the person and the way they react to individual circumstances. And if you interact with them as closely as I did, you'll find so many differences, and which is what was the opportunity as well as the challenge. Sonali, what I would like you to briefly talk about in the next maybe 5 or 10 minutes is how that you perceived as a challenge. The last time I met you, actually, I still remember the words that you used. I don't have any issues with that, and that has become an issue. Now I need to think about other things to talk about. And that for me was one of the high points of, it's fantastic. I mean, we started with certain things where you wanted to really go beyond, and which you did. And now you are looking to more challenges for you to tackle. So what really happened in that period?
Yeah, so to just briefly touch on what Ram said about Nicole and I, is that yes, we are, according to MBTI, the exact same personality type. And anybody who you ask who knows us would also kind of say we're cut from the same cloth, but it manifests itself in very, very different ways. And I think the first part of a lot of my personal work with Ram on how to be a better co-founder, a better leader, a better kind of person was kind of acknowledging that we both had very, very different insecurities that were coming from very, very different places. And that changed the vantage point with which we were looking at problems and trying to address them. And that's why it felt like we were talking kind of not the same language. And I think once I made the realization that I can't change Nicole, she can't change me. We have histories that are shaping who we are, but what we can do is to create an effective communication channel where we can speak frankly with one another and be honest with one another. And that really, I think, is what made all the difference. And having just like our friendship aside, having a functional working relationship. Ram actually suggested to me once, I guess like almost a year ago, that we go out for drinks once a week and have just a soul sister session. And I remember Nicole and I told her, I was like, we have to go have drinks right now, Ram said, and we just need to just hang out and just talk. And I think that really helped us to kind of also get out of our heads a little bit, and to just kind of relate as humans and to empathize with one another and not necessarily just be so transactional with all of our interactions with one another. So I think that was a big turning point. So yes, I think it was just like a few weeks ago when I was talking to Ram, and I said to him, I feel like I'm backsliding. I feel like I'm not making as much progress as I was before. And the things that used to bother me, that I used to have like laundry lists of things to discuss with you, are now really, I can articulate them in just like 1 or 2 sentences, and we can talk about it for half an hour, but I don't really know what else to say. And he was like, I'm so proud of you. You've made so much progress. And ultimately what we uncovered was that it wasn't that I was backsliding, is that I was moving into a new zone of discomfort, and that I was kind of moving into my next phase where I was holding myself to a completely different standard than I was previously. And I think that's what I've uncovered about myself and about this whole entire journey as a founder, is that even though certain things might get a little bit easier, the stakes continue to get higher and higher. And the sort of things you're responsible for continue to change and continue to push you. And there are kind of 2 ways you can react. One is to say that I know what to do. I've accomplished, I feel very secure in my leadership style and who I am, and I'm just going to move forward. Or you have to be incredibly self-aware and critical, and to acknowledge, like, wait a second, I feel like I'm messing up, or I'm not entirely sure that I know what I'm doing right now. And I think that's what the last 2 years of coaching gave me, is this kind of ability to have perspective and self-awareness on a regular basis, that I can, number one, congratulate myself when I'm doing a good job, but also number 2, check myself when something doesn't seem right, and to be able to discuss it. And I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah, and let me say that to you again, what I said to you about 2 weeks ago. Yes, I'm tremendously proud of you, Sonali. I think you should be tremendously proud of yourself, what you've achieved. For many people, that's a whole life's work, and which I think in last few years, and how young you are, within that period you have managed to achieve that. And you are a mother. I know how well you integrate all these things together. So going from here, what do you see for yourself now that many of those niggles, they've not been completely sorted out, but at least you can recognize them as niggles, not as life-threatening events.
Right,
so
right.
Moving beyond, what is it for you?
Mm-hmm. So ideally, I think what I've kind of come to realize now is, and this to me is kind of like the litmus test that I use to determine how successful things are, is I can say with some confidence now that Brideside is bigger than me, that I can be out of the office, I can go on a vacation, I can travel to visit another location somewhere else, and everything will be fine at work. And to me, that's kind of the litmus test that I want to continue, because it means to me that I have amazing people working at Brideside who care so much, who are going to continue to carry the torch, and not necessarily need me to be so present to do so. And I think what I want to do with that headspace and that capacity is to focus more on culture, and to focus more on the growth of Brideside as a place for professional development, and our reputation for hiring and for training and for setting people off into the world. That's ideally where I would like to begin to focus some of my time, or to at least carve out a meaningful amount of my time on that exercise. it was really interesting yesterday. We just hired a new sales manager. We threw her in. She was drinking from a fire hose for the last 6 weeks. And she gave a case presentation yesterday on her observations and what she's seen. And the first slide that she presented was on strengths of our sales team. And it was talk about, they really care about their customer and they care about the product they're selling. But on the opportunity slide, the area for improvement was connection to company. And that was tough to hear. But at the same time, I think that that's also what I'm feeling. And to me, was a lot of validation that kind of now's the time to really focus on building a workforce that feels connected and proud and loyal to Brideside and everything that I ideally want to give to our workforce.
Thanks a lot, Sonali. One of the things that I want to, what you talked about, we've been talking about for a while, and this is something phenomenal because at this stage of Brightside, at this stage of your life, so young you are talking about building a culture, which in fact, to me, is kind of a sine qua non of any great company. And that is why I have this really true belief that Brightside and you will go bigger and bigger. Now, what I want to do is to relate that to the people who are here today in the colloquium with you. One of the things that coaches generally are people who are introverts. They are not tremendous extroverts. And I know that you are not a great extrovert. Yes, you can be if you wish to, but most of the time you are more of an introvert than Nicole is. Now, given that, there is this belief within you which has made you far bigger than you are. And like you said just now, that Brightside is going to be bigger than you all that point in time. Yes, in a sense it is true because the Brightside is the belief part of you. And there is something which is really growing and which is continuing to grow. The question really is how coaches, even though the kind of canvas on which they are going to paint is going to be probably, in their opinion, limited from what you're looking at. The canvas, in fact, is larger. It can touch everybody on earth if they can just believe in themselves that they have something definitive to offer to people. Very often the problem is defining what is it that I have to offer to people. And you guys discovered it, whether it's an accident or whether it is through a business development class in Kellogg, mutual discussion, I'm not quite sure. So in that sense, in the last, let's say 4 or 5 minutes left, what is it that you would like them to think about? If you and I do believe, don't look upon yourself as someone who's young, but someone who's had this experience, extraordinarily powerful experience. You managed to grow a company from nothing into what it is today, and it'll grow bigger. What is it that you can tell them that you can emulate, and that'll help you to become a more powerful entrepreneur?
What can I emulate?
What can they emulate from you?
Okay. As a coach, what can you emulate from me to become stronger? That's a great question. I think what I've learned over the last few years is the power of context and the power of being a more active listener. And oftentimes when there is an issue that arises that's more transactional in nature or a relationship that can be stronger, it's often important to learn more about an individual and to understand their past and their motivations and finding common ground there. And I think that has helped me strengthen my credibility, but it's also helped me to more simply form relationships with people. And it's not forced. I'm not doing it because I think that you know, superficially you should. I think it's an important part of this coaching experience for me was that Rob and I got to know one another, and he got to know about me outside of Brideside. And that was incredibly powerful in us having these aha moments more quickly. It was also incredibly powerful in me opening up to him about things that sort of felt irrelevant to my journey at Brideside, that ended up being incredibly important and defining for me. So I would say emphasis on true relationship building with people, and a sincere interest in getting to know somebody and asking questions and just listening, is what will help you arrive to the right answers or to stronger relationships.
Yeah, and you believe that relationship building is the foundation for any business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially now, I mean, Brideside, our customers love us. They're obsessed with us. And I think a lot of the reason is because we coach our sales team to say, don't just ask them about their wedding, where it is, what the colors are, how many people are coming. Ask them about, so tell me more about yourself. Who are you in real life? What's a part of this process that's keeping you up at night? What are you most afraid of? And that kind of helps get down to, how can I actually help you? And yeah, I'm going to be selling bridesmaids dresses to you, but at the end of the day, nobody gets asked those kinds of questions anymore. Nobody actually legitimately wants to spend some time just getting to know who you are. And I think there's actually something incredibly authentic about that, that's really important.
Brilliant, Sonali. Just a couple of questions which are there in the chat box before we finish. One is from Shanaz. She said, did Nicole also engage coaching for her journey? And if she did or did not, how did it impact your partnership in real ways? And there's one more.
Yeah, she did. I mean, I don't want to necessarily speak for her, but I know she did end up working with another coach in Chicago, which I think was important to have like that physical interaction with one another. And I think they worked together for about 6 or 9 months. And yeah, I think it did have an impact on our partnership, but a lot of it was also around making sure that she felt that she had the confidence she needed to go out into the fundraising process. So I think that we were both in very different places when we needed coaching. And for her, it was a little bit more kind of like personal and more external, talking to investors and our board. And it was just a little bit different than it was for me. With that being said, it's always a work in progress. And there's still so much more that we can be doing to strengthen our partnership. But yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, just to add to what Sonali said, Nicole's requirements were more in a mentoring space. She really wanted to understand what she could do to move on. Sonali's was more in an exploratory stage. At least she was more willing to look at from that aspect. So they were different. And this is what you normally encounter, even when you are dealing with groups of people who are very, very closely connected. Their DNAs, their personalities are so different, even though like the MBTIs were pretty much identical. The other question is from MG. His question is, any tips for entrepreneurs in making a smooth transition from the vision phase into the rough and tumble implementation stage when doubts start occurring and some of the dreams get a reality check? Happens all the time, it doesn't.
Yes, that's every day. At 3 o'clock, I feel like I'm the chosen one. And then by 6 o'clock, I feel like I'm going to have to shut down my business. That's the roller coaster that I live on. I think yes, it's all about smoothing out that curve. And I think that's one way of actually how I try to articulate what I try to do for my team, is to kind of like make the oscillation a little less nauseating for people. And I think it's really hard to do, but I think part of it is, number one, acknowledging that that's part of it, that you are going to have very, very high highs and very low lows. And the second part of it is kind of setting very clear goals and stage gates to say that if I don't accomplish this goal by this time, I need to seriously reconsider what's going on right now, and whether this strategy was worthwhile or whether this vision is appropriate, and to kind of either roll back or to move forward. And I think the more you kind of set goals for yourself and the more you keep your feet to the fire, the more you're likely to allow yourself to fail fast and to build that kind of cadence for yourself of iteration. Because you're never, I think the other thing that the entrepreneurship has taught me, and this whole journey has taught me, is that you have to be okay with delivering 80%. If you try to get to 100%, you will always fail. And as soon as you get to 100%, you're going to uncover a million things that are wrong that you need to fix anyway. So be cool with just giving 75% or 80% of what you got. Put it out into the market. See what customers are going to react to. And then from there, figure out what works and what doesn't. But I think part of it is just being comfortable with failure and realizing that that's effectively how you know that you're trying hard. Is the more disappointments you have, the more likely you're eliminating the bad situations and the more likely you are to find the good one. They say, you know, what is it? Like Thomas Edison didn't discover the light bulb. He uncovered 99 ways not to. And I think that's how you have to be comfortable with that path as an entrepreneur.
Thanks a lot, Sonali. It's been wonderful. Thanks a lot for being here. And it was wonderful really having you. So we will continue our conversation, and those of you who really like to know more about Sonali, with her permission, I'll tell her, and then I'll pass on your messages in case you want to get in touch with her. She's in Chicago. So while closing today, the password is Chicago Bride. Chicago is the first word, Bride is the second word. So with that, we are pretty much on top of the hour. I'll close that. Once again, thanks, Sonali.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll meet again next third Wednesday at the same time for this Colloquium. Bye. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All the best. Thanks.
Thank you.